Good evening. Welcome to the February membership meeting of the Montgomery County Civic Federation. My name is Cheryl Gannon, and I'm the president. Tonight, we will defer our routine business until after our speakers. Our first speaker has another meeting at 7:30, so I'll now turn this over to Joyce Gwads to introduce the speaker.
Our first speaker is Michelle Rosenfeld. She's a real property, land use, and zoning lawyer here in Montgomery County, whose practice includes regulatory, judicial, and legislative matters related to land use and development. She brings to us a very broad experience. Private practice since 2006, 10 years as the lead attorney for the Montgomery County Planning Board, and before that, an attorney with the National Association of Home Builders. Welcome, Michelle. We're happy to have you.
Well, thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to be here and talk to you folks. It's nice to have so much civic engagement. And like last year, we have another series of major housing bills that have been put forward by the governor. And I plan to actually focus tonight on the Starter and Silver Act, the Starter and Silver Homes Act, which proposes very, very sweeping changes to zoning laws statewide. I'm going to start with a couple of definitions, and then I'll talk about what the implications of the law are. Some that are pretty widely understood, others that are less so. So the law defines a single-family house or single-family unit, both as a traditional single-family detached home, as we know those to be, and a townhouse. And in this bill, a townhouse means 3 or more attached units with vertical walls. So typically what you would think of as a stick of townhomes. There are some jurisdictions that are concerned that the definition is not clear enough, that it might allow, for example, 2/2s or otherwise piggyback townhome units. But generally speaking, I think it's understood to be a stick of 3 traditional townhomes or more. So what the law does is it establishes a minimum lot size in any zone that is zoned for single-family detached homes by right. It provides that townhomes, that the minimum lot size is 5,000 square feet. So if you live in an R60 zone, that's a minimum 6,000. Minimum lot size is now 5,000 square feet. If you're an R90 zone, minimum lot size is now 5,000 square feet. If you live in R200 zone, which has a minimum lot size under county law of 20,000 square feet, the minimum lot size is 5,000 square feet.
Make that happen. You wouldn't need to propose that now, but you can start.
Excuse me? Oh, can you not hear me?
No, we hear you perfectly. I muted one of our participants.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I thought you were talking to me. So basically, if you currently live in an R60 zone, the impact of allowing single family homes on a minimum 5,000 square foot lot is not going to be that significant. If you're in an R200 zone, that could be a significant change in the look and character of that neighborhood. There are certain areas that are exempted from this zoning provision. That includes properties that are in historic district, properties that are not served by public water and sewer, and properties that are in an agricultural zone. The really significant change, even beyond that, is that because a townhouse is defined as a single-family dwelling unit, those townhomes also can be located on a 5,000 square foot lot. That's the case if townhomes are going to be sold, say, as a single family, as a simple ownership. There's another provision in the law that says that townhouses that are being constructed under a condominium regime, there is no minimum lot size, which is a nuance in the law that I think many people are not aware of. And There is no minimum lot size associated with the condominium regime. And the reason why it works that way is because when you buy a fee simple lot, you buy the land and you buy a building that's on it. When you buy a condominium, the condominium regime owns the land and you buy a piece of the building. So it provides an opportunity for significantly higher densities for townhomes that are built under a condominium regime than one townhouse per 5,000 square foot lot. So the bill is sweeping in nature. MACO has raised concerns. MML has raised MACO, Maryland Association of Counties. The Maryland Municipal League has raised concerns. A number of individual jurisdictions, smaller municipalities have raised concerns, not just in the Montgomery County, but throughout the state. So the bill is in its early stages. There's a public hearing before the Economic Matters Committee in the House on Thursday. Signups would be due by tomorrow. And then there's another one before the Senate Committee, the Economic, Environmental, and I forgot, the EEE Committee on the 17th. So there are lots of proposed amendments in play. It's unclear which of those the administration is willing to accept. They have made it clear that the intention is not to override adequate public facilities ordinances or stormwater management ordinances or tree cover ordinances. The goal is to set the stage to allow the construction of significantly greater amounts of housing. The theory being that if you provide significant additional supply, housing prices will drop. The other thing to be aware of is that there are no affordability provisions of any kind in this legislation. The goal is to provide market rate units, and again, so saturate the market with additional supply that it has an effect on housing prices statewide. So that's my brief overall summary, and I'm happy to answer questions if people have questions about the bill itself. And to the extent I've got any more information on the legislative process, I'd be happy to talk about that as well.
Can you, for our members who aren't as familiar as some of us are, go over the other changes like in lot coverage, exterior dimensions, setbacks?
Yes, I would be happy to. The bill prohibits local jurisdictions right now from establishing minimum building setbacks greater than 10 feet in the front and the rear, or 5 feet on side setbacks. It prohibits imposing design, architectural, or aesthetic elements for a single family home. And it also prohibits minimum square footage or exterior dimensions for a single family home, and it prohibits lot coverage maximums for a single family home. One unintended consequence of some of these provisions, for example, the significantly reduced front and rear setbacks, especially in zones for larger properties, or the lot coverages, is that in some areas it's actually going to incentivize McMansions. It's going to incentivize the construction of larger homes rather than smaller, more affordable homes or townhomes. So I know that's an issue that's been raised with the State Department of Housing and Community Development, which has been involved in drafting this bill and will be involved in recommending potential friendly amendments if some come forward.
So
It's a very, yeah.
Go ahead. It's a very.
I was going to say it's a stunningly sweeping preemption of local zoning, and the staff at the planning department has given a couple of briefings to the planning board, and one overarching concern that they have is that under both county law and state law, as you all know, there are comprehensive plans that carefully look at local jurisdictions as well as how the county should be developed countywide. Some of us remember the wedges and corridors. There are under Thrive, there are community centers that the county has worked very hard to focus growth in certain parts of the county and keep other parts of the county less dense, more rural, both for infrastructure reasons as well as aesthetic reasons. And this would significantly undermine those efforts if it were adopted in the form that it's been proposed.
I'm a little bit confused when you say adequate public facilities or tree laws are not going to be overridden, but there's nobody reviewing these proposals because it's by right. So who and when would step in and say, no, you can't take down 5 trees on that property?
Sure. You have to go in for a building permit, and it's time you go in for a building permit, stormwater management control review kicks in. Adequate public facilities, as a practical matter, are probably not going to be affected, are probably not going to be implemented because you have to hit certain thresholds in terms of impact for schools or impact for transportation. But at least in theory, it doesn't preempt whatever tree canopy coverage or stormwater management or other adequate public facilities ordinance that would apply to smaller single-family developments, including townhouses.
Okay, we are
And
going to.
I'm giving you what I'm giving you is what's written in the bill and what has been explained by the administration.
Okay.
I'm not here to tell you any of this is a good idea. So please don't mistake my explanation as providing support or justification for it. It is just a stunningly broad preemption of local zoning authority.
Chris Reynolds is asking, do the changes on setbacks affect single-family homes built on a lot or just townhouses?
Both.
Oh, everything then.
Everything.
The setbacks are changing. Okay.
Everything. All of the standards apply equally to single family and to townhouse types of construction. And in the law, a single family house is defined to include both single family detached and townhouse.
Okay. All right. We have just a few minutes for questions. So Jerry, a concise question, please.
Yeah, I'm particularly concerned about that. They're using the existing fire code and building these huge wood frame buildings without requiring sprinklers, lightning rods, or anything else. What we saw in California was some nice big fires that once they get started, and these houses can be within 5 feet of existing houses. None of these single family detached houses that we have were built really to expect large wooden structures. And we saw what happened with over 16,000 buildings destroyed in California. Is that what our governor is looking for?
There are some proposed amendments explicitly say that building code and fire codes are not going to be overridden or preempted. The DHCD has taken the position that even as written, those fire and safety and other building codes are not overridden. But I do think before this is over, that will be expressly written into the law.
Okay, Alan Davis.
Yeah, I have a question. Are 3 townhome lots permitted as long as you have a 5,000 square foot minimum lot?
If you are selling those townhouse units as fee simple, yes, the minimum is 5,000 square feet. If a builder elects to establish a condominium regime, then those lots can be less than 5,000 square feet, or at least the site area associated with each townhome. So, for example, if you have a 15,000 square foot property, if you were selling those townhomes, each one would have to be on a 5,000 square foot lot. If you built them as a condominium and you were selling units within a condominium building, I can't give you the exact numbers, but it could be 7 or 8 or 9 units on that 15,000 square feet. And again, please don't take those as engineered numbers. They're not, but it would be more than 3, easily more than 3 on 15,000 square feet.
Got it. Thank you. And one other follow-up question. Given how pervasive this proposed legislation is, have you given any thought as to how this would stand up in the courts?
I have. The reality is, at least initially, my view is that it's the state that gives zoning authority to the counties and the local jurisdictions. All of that authority derives from enabling legislation and state law. And so what the state giveth, the state can taketh away. So until the bill is finalized, it's going to be difficult to determine with any finality if there's some basis for challenging the law. But as a general principle, it's hard for me to see that there's going to be an easy road.
Got it. Thank you.
All right, Erika Jorgensen.
Just a quick question. So what happens to height restrictions, which has been one of the most important things limiting the size of rebuilds in our neighborhoods?
There are no specific prohibitions on height limitations in the law. There is a provision that says that a local jurisdiction can't adopt regulations that indirectly prohibit or limit the construction of housing. But it's hard for me to see how a height limit of 25, 35, 45 feet is going to prohibit the construction of a house, a single family or attached townhouse, assuming you can meet the front and side setbacks and lot coverage and other standards. So height is not a limiting factor here. In other words, the state has not tried to preempt regulations of height.
Okay, Joe Harkins.
Hi, Michelle. You mentioned that R60s are maybe not that affected, but let's say you have a 9,000 square foot lot and it's sold as fee simple. Does that mean you can only put in one townhouse, 5,000 feet, the other one's 4,000, it's not enough space? Or are you saying you can squeeze in 2 or 3 even on a 9,000 square foot lot?
If you are going to sell a fee simple townhouse, you can only put in one. If you're going to create a condominium regime, you can put in 2 or 3 or 4, depending on how many you can physically put on a lot within the other development parameters.
So the R60s would become kind of targets for the condominium arrangement rather than the one or 1.5 townhouses.
I think that any property would become a target for a condominium regime because a 5,000 square foot lot for a townhouse is an enormous townhouse lot. They typically range, 2,000 or 3,000 square feet. There certainly are places in the county that have larger townhome lots. There are some very, very large townhomes in different places in the county. But I think that as a matter of course, if you have a lot and they're going to be developing townhomes, it's far more likely that they're going to do so under a condominium and get more than one townhome per 5,000 square feet.
Okay, thank you.
Brenda, go ahead.
Michelle, has any determination been given by the state of actually what is the actual need for this property development? Or are they just it seems to me they're just setting out something, but I've not heard anything about what are the actual needs for homes and condominiums or whatever.
There are studies that the governor's office has cited saying that the state is significantly in arrears on how much housing is required. Part of that is based on the fact that housing prices in Maryland are significantly higher than elsewhere. Part of it is just based on the number of housing units that are being built. And so there are other people who dispute that there is not enough housing in the pipeline, not enough housing being constructed, but it's the position of the governor, and they have cited materials in both their presentations to the General Assembly as well as in their announcements when they announced that this bill was forthcoming, that they have empirical data to say there's not enough housing.
Have they shared this empirical data?
Yes, they have. There are a couple of presentations that were made before the General Assembly and the Department of Housing and Community Development provided information in those presentations. And there also was some background information in what the governor's office issued in its press release. I'd be happy to share that information with Cheryl tomorrow, and we can distribute that if that would be helpful.
Thank you.
Joe Teitelbaum is asking, what about duplex, so-called single-family houses?
Interestingly, they're not included in the bill. They're not defined as a single-family house. There is no reference to duplex whatsoever.
So you have to deliver 3 in order to get the benefits of this bill, right?
Correct. It's either a single-family detached house or it's a townhouse stick with a minimum of 3 townhouse units.
And that's ridiculous.
I think a lot of people are surprised that there is no provision for duplex in this bill.
Thank you. Thank you, but we can see already how crazy it is.
Yeah, okay. All right, please raise your hand if you want to speak. Tamara Stuckey has said, what steps can citizens take to kill the bill? I don't know if you can answer that or not, Michelle, but.
Well, the legislative process has just essentially begun in Annapolis. There is a public hearing before the Economic Matters Committee, the House Committee, on Thursday, and there is another one before the Senate the following Thursday. Certainly send in written testimony. There may or may not be enough slots left for you to go and testify in person, but sending testimony into the General Assembly, calling your state delegates, reaching out to them, letting them know how concerned you are. At the end of the day, the General Assembly has to decide whether or not it's going to adopt this bill. Some of you may remember the governor put forward a sweeping housing bill last year that failed to get through the House or the Senate. So it did not go anywhere. This is another attempt. So you need to get involved in the legislative process.
Liz Joyce, last question, concise, please. You're muted.
I'm wondering, I wanted to say that the reason I think that it's townhouses is that the developers don't want to, that's where they make the most money. And they've made it clear. There was a study in Silver Spring that showed that the developers weren't, and that was 5 years ago, preferred to build townhouses and weren't interested in duplexes.
Okay. All right. Well, if there's nothing else, we are going to say thank you to Michelle, who's going to another meeting on this subject. Thanks a lot for coming. You always say yes when we ask you. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Thank you. I appreciate the invitation.
All right. Okay. Good night. Good night.
Okay. Good night.
We're now going to move to our next speaker. And Joyce, do you want me to introduce her, or are you going to? Hearing nothing, I will. It's Erika Jorgensen, who's a PhD economist affiliated with the Citizens Coordinating Committee for Friendship Heights. She spent a lot of time and effort evaluating 2 things. One, the comptroller's report on housing, which is the underpinning, policy underpinning for much of what's going on at the state level. It's what they sort of use to justify how they put this bill together. And then to some extent, the Pew report that came out on housing sometime last year. So anyway, Erika and then Rohit Khanna, who many of us know from Somerset, has participated in contributed to that report and putting it In final form, we're very grateful to Erika and Leanne Tobias for finding us this gem and Rohit. And so with that, I will turn this over to Erika to speak. Alan will be scrolling her paper as she speaks so that
Okay,
we
great.
have something to look at. Okay?
Okay, and so as mentioned, and I hope people know this, that if there's any analytic support for this bill, it is the Comptroller of Maryland's housing report that came out in October. And maybe many of you haven't looked at it. I read it carefully because that is their justification for the Starter Silver bill. So along with another resident, Julia Lane, and then Rohit's help, we decided to start critiquing this report because basically the analysis really doesn't lead to the conclusions that they claim. So what I'm going to show to you is a 3-page summary, and then there's a 10-page report that stands behind it. I'm going to submit this tomorrow as written testimony. I'm going to try to get a speaking slot to say a few words about it directly to the committee, and we'll see what happens. So let me quickly go through the line of argument that the housing report uses to come up with a Starter Silver thing. So if you go to this first, if you could scroll down a little bit, is Maryland losing large numbers of residents, and is it because of high housing costs? This is the first area of claims made by this report. And so since I'm an economist and I've spent my career doing data analysis and policy analysis, I decided to look and see. And in fact, no, net out migration is actually quite modest. Before COVID, so 17 to 19, about 0.4% of Maryland's population was leaving each year. Importantly, the housing report has no idea why people are leaving. They look at people who left during COVID and then they make up why they think, just speculate on what reasons it could have been. There's a thing, United Van Lines, which moves 166,000 people between states every year, so it's a huge database. Their survey for 2025 says that Maryland is a balanced state. That is, just about as many people come in as depart. And so the thing to focus on is that the comptroller basically used the pandemic years. The pandemic years are anomalies. You should not assume anything based on the pandemic years. They themselves show that between 23 and 24, the net out migration from Maryland fell by half. Why? Because we were getting back to normal. So the second thing is that the evidence we have says people are moving out of Maryland for jobs or to be near family. The comptroller's report, with no evidence whatsoever, speculates that people are leaving because of housing costs. And their evidence for that is that during COVID, younger and lower income people left compared to pre-pandemic years. It doesn't talk about remote work. It doesn't talk about what's happened in 2024 and 2025. And again, the source that we have is this survey from United Van Lines actually asked people why they're moving. And in Maryland, for Marylanders, it's something like 30% of Marylanders say they left because of a job, and about 30% say they left to be closer to family. Nobody cites costs or housing costs as a as a reason. So the next point that the report makes is claiming that outmigration is leading to falling state income, a shrinking economy, and a declining state. So this is a crisis, and it's just we need to do something dramatic because it's a terrible crisis. But again, this is mostly because they're talking about what happened during the pandemic. And that is absolutely not data you can use to project what's going on in Maryland today, much less what's going to go on in Maryland in the future. So then there's specific, scroll to the next page, critiques about the data they're using. It's not the right data set. So the next part is quite important. Are housing costs in Maryland too high? And are housing prices rising so fast that something has to be done because it's a crisis? So here's the facts. Housing prices are barely holding flat in real terms. And a buyer's market is emerging. Now, this is recent. It's over the last year. But the Maryland Association of Realtors says the buyer's market is basically underway already. And most importantly, if you look at the state of Maryland's own property tax assessments, as you probably know, a third of properties are assessed each year, and they're assessed for a 3-year period. So for the most recent property tax assessments, they have assessed that all the residential properties in Maryland rose by about 4% a year over the last averaged over the last 3 years, and inflation is about 3.2%. So what does that tell you? Housing prices have completely flattened in Maryland. Okay, and then I said that we're moving to a buyer's market. Okay, so the next point they're making is, does Maryland's housing demand exceed supply? Is there a shortage of housing in Maryland? Well, like everywhere, like the whole nation, right? Maryland's housing market has been recovering from the pandemic. But Maryland now, as you know, has been hit with very large job losses, and the renter vacancy rates exceeded the national average in 2023. And in 2024, they're about the same as a bunch of states that the report likes to compare us to, states where people are moving to or from. So the difference in the rental vacancy rate is trivial compared to New York, Virginia, North Carolina, DC, Pennsylvania. And in all those years, the rental vacancy rates fall between 5 and 8%. That HUD itself defines a balanced rental market. So they both cite funny numbers and then interpret them in a way that's not normal. Homeowner vacancy rates also were just very similar across the 12 states that they were comparing. And then keep in mind, too, that this pattern of already weakening demand in Maryland's housing market is going to be absolutely compounded by cutoffs of international immigration and also huge federal layoffs and the implications of that. So if you'd say anything about Maryland's housing market, it's a buyer's market and things are softening quickly. Next, the report talks about building costs. Are Maryland's building costs leading to too little supply? Yes, building costs are high in Maryland. Why? Because wages are higher in Maryland and land is more expensive in Maryland. This is because Maryland is, first of all, a rich state. We have the fourth highest average household income in America, and we are the sixth most densely populated. Those both say that building costs are going to be high. But get this, the median housing prices in Maryland are only 16th in the nation. So that actually means that compared to the rest of the nation, houses are actually relatively cheap in Maryland, not expensive. It's not surprising that we have zoning and land use regulations that are stricter in Maryland because we're densely populated, we're very wealthy, and we have expectations of high quality infrastructure. We have expectations of environmental protections. And so, we want to make the point that density has to be planned in coordination with physical, social, environmental infrastructure. Once infrastructure is in place, you cannot exceed the infrastructure capacity without undermining the quality of life. Okay, go on to the next one. So do the report's conclusions make sense? So whether you're going to be persuaded by this report depends on, first, do you believe the story about surging out-migration, a shrinking tax base, and imminent economic decline of the state? Second, you accept that it's housing regulations that have caused a shortage of affordable homes in Maryland. And third, somehow preempting single-family zoning is the magical, costless solution. And the statement that I would make is trickle-down benefits from upzoning are too small and too slow. An accumulating amount of recent research is showing that even under the most optimistic assumption, it would take decades for allowing, building any kind of housing any kind of housing to drive down prices and create general affordability. Supply constraints have been shown to absolutely be unimportant in explaining housing prices. If you look across different places, Houston has some of the least affordable housing, but it also has the least zoning. So you cannot find connections directly between strictness of zoning and housing prices. The real problems in the housing prices are things like oligopoly in the home building sector, which has accelerated since the Great Recession. In 2007, 2008, lots of home builders went out of business. It's now a very concentrated industry. And the most important thing that no one wants to talk about, income inequality. The problem with housing is it's not affordable for the bottom 50%. This is not about averages. It's all about people in the bottom 50% because of income inequality. Upzoning will not create homes in Maryland that are 30% less expensive, which is what the governor says. And it absolutely cannot solve housing affordability problems because experience across the U.S. shows that does not work. Actually, Leanne Tobias pulled out some numbers from December of new townhouses for sale in Montgomery County had a 40% higher price than single-family houses for sale. So townhouses in Montgomery County and most likely across Maryland are higher priced, and this is not going to drive down housing prices in Maryland. So this is a very quick summary. Then there's 10 pages of much more detailed analysis for you. I think this was circulated for people who are interested. But it really frustrates me that a state as well off, as sophisticated with, as you would think, strong administration as we have, would produce something so shoddy. I think this is embarrassing. It's an embarrassing piece of work. And it's clearly driven by political ideology, not by serious policy analysis. Okay. I don't know if that was more confusing than helpful for people.
No, that was very helpful. Cheryl, go ahead.
Yeah, that was great. Okay, Alan Davis, you've had your hand up since the beginning. Go ahead.
Erika, first, I just want to thank you for taking the time to put something so thoughtful and so accurate together for the constituency that's on this call. It's super helpful to see someone like yourself become involved. And I do think that the government is trying to create a story that masks, reality. And if you look at the real estate tax assessments in this county have gone up by over 200% over the last 10 years. If you look at the median price of a home of roughly $600,000, your real estate taxes are over $7,000 a year in Montgomery County. Throw on top of that, insurance, utilities, the cost of home ownership, regardless of whatever, whether you have a 3% mortgage or a 6% mortgage, you're automatically well above the median income to afford a medium priced house. And a lot of that cost is associated with state regulated fees and taxes. I mean, the transfer taxes alone to buy a home are some of the highest in the country. And so, it's amazing how the state wants to bring down the price of housing, yet they, throw on unbelievable fees and taxes and the cost of utilities. And so, um, I'm very excited with the prospects of getting your research into the hands of the community and the state. And just want to say thank you again.
And there are dozens and dozens of arguments against the Starter Silver Bill that are not, I'm only trying to counter the arguments put forward in this report, but there, of course, are many, many other directions to take.
Okay, Bruce Schulman, go ahead.
Thank you. I have two questions. I think you can only address one of them. My first concern is the notion that all of this can be done by right and that it's going to be hard, if not impossible, to fight any construction of any type. The second thing, which I think you could respond to, is the fact that Maryland is one of the most diverse states in every way, shape, and form of any state. And so why is there a necessity to do this at the state level rather than at the county level? It's impossible for me to believe that the needs of, say, the westernmost county in the state or the easternmost county in the state are the same as Montgomery County or counties that are similar to Montgomery County, such as Howard and Prince George's and Anne Arundel. Maybe you could speak to that, and maybe that should be a big point, saying that shouldn't this be left to the localities and the counties themselves?
The way the comptroller's report runs its argument is this is an existential crisis for Maryland. It's an existential crisis. And so we need to take emergency action at the state level. We can't wait for the counties. We can't wait for, figuring out diverse needs. It's a crisis. And they go through all these things, including all the costs of regulation, none of which, by the way, are about zoning. And then they conclude with, well, you know what? A bunch of places are trying upzoning. Why don't we try upzoning? It's an astonishing leap. And you know why they're doing it? Because it's free, because there's no budget cost. That's why they're choosing. Well, it's sort of an ideological preference of a lot of people, and it's free. So, hey, the governor can do it, and he can look like he's a hero. But if you bother to go through this report, it's, as I said, the way they get around all these arguments is by declaring an emergency.
Okay. Jill Titlebaum, go ahead. We can't hear you. You're muted.
Oh, I appreciate your economic and social analysis. I wonder if you can get past the averages, as others have mentioned, and get down to what Montgomery County has in terms of its affordability for housing and its dearth of housing, if to the extent there is one, because with the Council of Governments, we're supposed to produce so many houses over a course of a period of time, which supposedly the county is committed to, but that was the Council of Governments that came up with that category. Can you explain that at all?
Well, I actually haven't looked that closely at the housing target issue, but I know actually Mark Ehrlich has done some fantastic analysis saying that the issue is that developers don't want to build affordable housing in Montgomery County. There's no shortage of luxury housing in Montgomery County. There's a shortage of affordable housing, and that's because it's not going to get built by the market. And the pipeline has tens of thousands of houses ready to be built, et cetera. So this again is that governments, both the county government and the state government, don't want to face the fact that affordable housing cannot come for free.
Yeah, but what about the commitment to the Council of Governments? Does that make any
That
sense?
I don't know that much about, so I'm not the right one to speak to that.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that. I thought you might know whether that is a feasible thing at all, because it doesn't mention affordability.
Yeah, that's a problem.
Yeah.
Jerry Garson,
Okay.
go ahead.
What the comptroller's report didn't want to mention is that our income tax between the state and the county tax is over 10%. If you move to Pennsylvania, you'll pay about 1/4 of that in income taxes. If you want to not pay sales tax, you move to Delaware that doesn't have a sales tax of 6%. Our transfer fees are probably 10 or 20 or 30 times higher than most of the rest of the country. We've done everything to try to tax people from having anything affordable in this county. So therefore, you're only left with rich people who can afford it. And the comptroller's office is the one most guilty of having the high income tax rates. Maybe if you lowered the income tax rates, people could more afford housing. But we've done everything to make sure housing is unaffordable. And what they keep thinking is, oh, if we tear down houses and cost you $1 million an acre or more to tear down houses, or 2 million or 3 million, we could build something affordable. It's just a giant joke. And all they want to do is think, oh, if we change zoning. Changing zoning normally would take 50 years for anything to happen, but they think it's going to happen in 2 weeks.
Well, I think it could wreak chaos on our neighborhoods in 2 weeks.
Okay, Howard, go ahead.
Hi, good evening. And Erika, again, thanks to you and Rohit for the great work that you've been doing on this. It seems to me that what the state is proposing here is not much more than a gigantic unfunded mandate, at least unfunded from the state level. And that the cost of doing this, if God forbid it were to be passed as it's now written, would be dumped on the local jurisdictions. What kind of effect is that going to have?
Yeah, no, I mean, there's going to be all kinds of infrastructure implications, school, traffic, all, I mean, it's just chaos. It's called not having planning. It's absolutely insane. But I think that the point about high taxes, in a sense, is correct, right? That's the state is under huge budget pressures. So they need to propose something that doesn't have a cost. So they can't propose either giving subsidies to make housing affordable for poor households. They can't propose, cutting taxes for anyone. Why? Because there's no money. So the only thing they can do is, this kind of, power move of announcing that they're doing this great thing of upzoning. And I mean, I think that in a lot of our neighborhoods, it's just going to create chaos. Um, and chaos and then unknown infrastructure costs.
John Holden has a question here. MoCo's own development pipeline analysis did not identify zoning as a top barrier to developers building the housing units already approved. What approaches could we offer as alternatives, as amendments that might actually help Maryland to have more housing that's affordable?
And let me say that the comptroller's report itself does not have any mention of zoning being a problem for housing in Maryland. Imagine that. Even the report that supposedly, defends the bill does not have any analysis that zoning is an issue in Maryland. I don't know what we can do with this bill. People have talked about amendments, but I just don't even. I mean, the only amendment, unless you make amendments that basically defeat the point of the bill. So that's actually not for me. That's for the lawyers to come up with, I suppose.
Paul Jarzynski.
Yeah, Erika, thank you for your excellent presentation. And I do agree with you that the bill is so far off based on a controller's controller's report that's so far off that it's really kind of silly to try to rewrite it and amend it to make any sense. It needs to be completely rewritten. What's in there isn't any good at all. The one technical question I had for you is because I was involved with this early on in questioning the statistics that they used. I got a report from Julia Lane that was the initial write-up of the document that looks very similar to what Alan just flashed up on the screen, but it's not identical.
No, we wrote it together. We started writing it together. Julie and I started doing this together.
Right. So is this what we saw tonight, the polished form
yes.
of? Okay. So is there a way to get a copy of that so that
Paul,
I can replace?
Yeah, Paul, I'm just answer this for everyone. I'm going to email that report out tomorrow to everyone. So the one you have, don't use publicly, please.
Yeah, there's a few last minute edits. Cheryl, I'll send you I think what the final, because I'm going to submit it tomorrow morning. Leanne found a few, typos and things that I fixed. So
okay, so then we'll distribute it to everyone.
And then yeah.
But again, thank you again.
Nothing else? Okay. Joe Harkins.
Yes, thanks for the presentation. I read a little bit about the Census Bureau putting out a kind of mid-decade population study. And I think Maryland only increased its population by like 20,000 people net in 5 years. I didn't know whether that was worked into the report or your testimony. And then they're supposed to follow up with county net migration and in-migration. Would they tend to support your conclusions and your analysis, the Census Bureau data?
I mean, Maryland is slowly losing population. That's absolutely true, but it's at a very slow rate. The thing that is misleading in the comptroller's report is they look at what happened during 2020 to 2022, and then they claim that's the trajectory we're following into the future. That's not true. That was during the pandemic, right? People were doing remote work. There were all kinds of people moving all over the place. And so that's really the dilemma. And the data they have is the census data is extremely delayed. They won't have any 2025, 2024 data for a few more months. So they're working with 2023. So you tell me, do you think things are the same today as they were? No, they're not the same as in 23. So this is the dilemma. And I guess it's convenient for them to use those years because it lets them tell the story of drama and emergency and crisis.
Okay, thanks.
Liz Joyce, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I'm overjoyed with this presentation because many of us have been saying for years that there's no evidentiary basis for these plans, and they're as sweeping as they are unsubstantiated. There is a recent study from two scholars from Vanderbilt. It's called Post-Neoliberal Housing Policy. And Mark
It's
Ellis,
in my footnotes. I used that.
oh, awesome, awesome. Well, it's a wonderful study, and they say that zoning is definitely, from their point of view, is not the cause of any of the issues that we're talking about. And I spoke with the housing secretary of the state about this, and he debunked the study. And he said it's been widely discredited. And I looked afterwards, there is no wide discreditation. If
No, that's not
anything,
true.
it hasn't
Yeah.
been read by many people, but it's most impressive. And they not only put out this analysis, but they put out another book of ideas. And most of them deal with finance, different tax policies. They believe that the housing market must be shaped to produce the right outcomes, and that the state has the authority and capacity to do that. And they have many ideas which I can share with everyone. As to, Joel's question about the commitment to the Council of Governments, as I understand it, there's well, there may have been a commitment, but that recently the Council of Governments changed its projections, and that, as John's note said, there is no shortage of zoned units for the anticipated population that is to come here in the next 30 years.
Yeah.
And so where did all this come from? Well, in Minneapolis, when they did this, they wanted to do something big and bold and put them on the map, they did not do any economic development studies. They invested $250,000 in a PR campaign, and that PR campaign has been very successful, and it has been the basis for many of these plans all over the country, which the people behind our plan are saying have worked. But if you look at the literature, you can see that it's very questionable. And as you said, a statistically insignificant change from these zoning measures. Yona Freemark has pointed out that it's about 0.8% in 3 to 9 years change in the amount of housing. So that does not warrant this kind of stunningly sweeping measure, which has no basis in any kind of substantial study and evidence. And it's really shocking to many of us who followed this carefully that this governor and his housing secretary are proposing this.
I mean, it's also important to remember that the housing markets, first of all, the recession in 2007 to 9, right? There was an incredible disruption to the housing markets. And then during the pandemic, followed by the sort of fastest rising interest rates, I think, ever. So mortgage rates soared. All of these things had just disrupted the housing market in ways that it's only now settling down. So to make these decisions based on, these patterns of the recent past is it's malpractice. It's absolute malpractice.
That's right.
Alan Davis, your hand's still up.
Yeah, I just received the 2025 census data on state migration. And when you look at the state of Maryland, the largest beneficiaries were the District of Columbia, Virginia, New York, none of which are low-cost states. I mean, Florida got their fair share, but it pales in comparison to the amount of people that moved to the state of Virginia or to the District of Columbia or to New York. And so to make the argument that people are leaving the state because they can't afford it and because the housing, that is blatantly false when you look at the data that was just released by the government.
Thanks.
I can send that around to everybody as well, so you can look at the net state-to-state migration figures that were just released by the government.
Carlotta has a question in the chat that says, are there alternative ideas that have been considered or could be proposed to support raising financial means? I'm not sure what that means. Maybe it's...
There are tons of ideas for affordable housing that have been tested around the world. I'm not an expert on them, but I mean, I know there are. The dilemma is they're trickier than this. They're not, 3 lines in a bill.
And we have Kirill says, as a licensed architect in the state of Maryland, I can tell you that the market solution to affordable housing is not townhouses, but high-rise multifamily housing with micro units. Government has a critical role through community-focused planning, which cannot be replaced by statewide mandates that remove local control over our built environment. Density could lead to progress and economic improvement, but only if it's properly planned around rapid transit.
Thanks. That actually raises another issue, which I left out of this because I couldn't really figure out the way the data worked. But multifamily housing, the building of multifamily housing has collapsed across the state of Maryland, driven by Montgomery County and is it Howard County who passed rent stabilization. And since rent stabilization, there's no more building of multifamily units. And that actually accounts for, I think, a good chunk of whatever decline you might see in how the building of housing units is due to that. But they don't mention rent stabilization as being a problem, even though it is a huge. I mean, it might be worth it, but it has a huge cost in terms of discouraging production.
And production did go up in the fourth quarter of 2025.
It did, but
and
it had, anyway.
but
So that's why
both-
the patterns were complicated. That's why I didn't put that in.
Yeah, the two projects that got permitted.
Who's speaking?
It's Alan Davis, sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
The two projects that were capitalized were both heavily subsidized. One was 100% affordable, and the other had a tax abatement. So to think that rent control does not have a draconian effect on the multifamily building industry is a misnomer.
And that is not mentioned. The dilemmas of rent stabilization is not a policy that they mention.
We don't really have enough good data on the barriers to building the multifamily housing because the Pike and Rose report said something like at the rate it was going, building that housing, it would take 50 years to build everything that's already approved. And they asked the developers why, and the developers said because the projected job growth in Montgomery County didn't justify moving any faster. And that also came up in the pipeline report, the sort of, I don't know what you call our economic growth in the state, lukewarm or not very hearty, but the really big buildings, you have to have some idea that you can fill them.
The comptroller's report tries to argue that housing brings jobs, and that when you have lots of housing that's going to be cheap, then lots of companies will move to Maryland and everything will be great. And this is completely backwards as far as I can tell.
Right. Exactly. Jeff, go ahead.
Excuse me. Erika, I appreciate and concur with your critique and very well founded. But in the course of the problems with the report and the governor's position, I've lost track of the thread of a critical question related to your comment on income inequality. And my question is, do we think, believe, or can we document that there is significant income inequality within Montgomery County and also a problem with the supply of affordable housing in Montgomery County, regardless of the rest of the state? What about where we are here?
Let me tell an even broader story. Income equality in America has become terrible since the Reagan administration. So if you start in 1980, you can see income inequality is just getting worse and worse and worse, and it's accelerated. And over the last 10 years, it's accelerated even more. It's a nationwide disaster. Maryland is no different than the rest of the country. Montgomery County, I assume, is the same. So the problem is that, as you have this, a chunk of quite rich people and then a whole bunch of rather poor people, the housing market is catering to the richer people. We said this before, there's no way to just magically get the market to build lower price units without some kind of incentives. But I haven't looked at, we might have looked at the numbers for Montgomery County. I don't know, it was a while ago. Now gotten distracted with this stuff. So
Do you
Okay.
mean without government incentives when you say?
yeah, some kind of subsidies. That's right. That the private market doesn't produce affordable housing. It's not profitable enough. I'm sure some of you know more about it than I do. This is what I've read, that this is what developers say.
So maybe we can do one thing while we still have Erica. Carlotta, if you're here, our legislative alert in Carlotta's neighborhood generated some objections and controversy from residents. And Carlotta, can you or Joel tell us the kinds of things that people said that, maybe we can discuss now?
Sure. Well, I mean, some things had to do with just questions regarding where, our summary of your letter and the information that you shared with the Federation, with all of the associations was coming from. They wanted to make sure that it was not a personal, I guess, position. So that, that's one thing. But some members of the community said that they were experts in the field of affordable housing, and that they were not against increased housing density, and that they didn't and then I'll leave the floor to Joel, who can maybe elaborate on this, but they felt that oftentimes a reaction against this type of legislation is ultimately harms people, people who want affordable housing basically to be built. So that was a bit of the position. Joel, do you want to expand on that?
Go ahead, Joel, you're muted.
Cheryl, can I speak? Yes.
Sure, go ahead.
I'd like to back up what Carla said. We have a few people in our neighborhood. It's a somewhat diverse middle income neighborhood with lots of new young people and families moved in here, some of whom are involved in the what I call idealistic YIMBY movement. And then they get attached to the idea of increased densification. Some of them actually work for organizations that would benefit from it, so they get self-interest. But they mistrust NIMBYs. You know what NIMBYs are? All the rest of us, right? Who own homes and who somehow are resisting these things. So it becomes a cultural, ideological struggle. But several of them pointed out, and that really struck me, that they've been heavily influenced by articles in Greater Washington by Dan Reed. And I've been reading Mr. Reed's stuff for some time. It's bogus, but it's amazing how young people fall for it. Me being an 86-year-old. And so I'm wondering if Erika or anyone else can understand what is this upwelling of concern for affordable housing when they don't even understand the dynamics of the lower income, upper income problem in Montgomery County. Is it just plain naivete, or is it there's some self-interest that's involved?
They're too young to remember trickle-down economics from the Reagan era.
Yeah, they don't even know what
this
the
is
word
trickle-down housing.
means.
It's
Yeah.
exactly the same.
Exactly. Well, that's what the former planning commission, chairman said. We need trickle-down housing. That was.
Well, I don't know. In my mind, that phrase still reeks of the Reagan administration. And
they changed it to filtration. Yeah. And any
they
word
call it filtering. I know.
Any word that will bamboozle.
This is kind of like when Bill Clinton, became in favor of welfare reform. Like, the Democrat, how shocking! Now this is the abundance agenda coming from the Democrats. It's a radical shift to show that something, but it hasn't been well thought through. Because they can talk about how regulations prevent the building of things. You know what they prevent the building of? The building of things like fracking under your house, and pollution in your backyard. That's the kind of stuff that regulations and the unregulated golden age of America, when the highway system was built through minority neighborhoods and knocked them down. Is that really what you want to go back to? Is that it? Or when the Superfund sites, we have Superfund sites. Why? Because companies dumped toxic waste wherever they wanted. So
Yeah.
the abundance agenda is so simplistic and one-sided. And I think that's why we're trying to push this line that yes, density is great if it has planning and accompanying infrastructure. Brilliant. But that's
And
expensive.
developers willing to build it, right?
And someone has to pay for it.
Yeah. The developers don't even want to build the high density places anymore.
Yeah.
I think their position is we need guarantees so we don't have risk. And then when we don't have risk, we need subsidies, so we'll build it. In other words, they want to make money at both ends.
Yeah.
And one thing you might
That makes
do
me sad. That makes my kids sad.
appeal
You
the
know what?
I'm sorry,
It's koi pond time. Yeah, koi pond
who's
time.
speaking? We can hear you, whoever. Appeal to the idealism by pointing out that there's nothing in this bill that will stop developers from taking down the naturally occurring affordable housing and putting up more expensive housing. And if you look at the Racial Inequity Social Justice Review on the University Boulevard Corridor Plan, it's not the first time they've pointed out that, building new market rate housing where you have homes that people can buy for $400,000 or $500,000 has a way of not only raising prices in the neighborhood, but changing the racial and economic composition. And that's just one angle of this. But I think it's for young people who I think are genuinely concerned about, who gets hurt with NIMBYism, getting in a little bit deeper. On that there's no affordability levers here, and that affordable housing really requires a subsidy, which is not being offered to us. The state is broke. So it's complicated to try to get it. And, the state has unfortunately just gone to reductive slogans, supply and demand, and it's not going to work that way. I'm going to go to Leanne because she hasn't had a chance to speak yet. Leanne, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in on the young people, their ideology, and it's a complex issue in the sense that on the one hand, if you upzone existing single family housing, the townhomes that are produced are going to be at about the same price or more expensive. And I just spent a weekend going through about over 100 townhome listings throughout Maryland, and that was generally very well demonstrated. But on the other hand, if you have an undeveloped site, either a greenfield or a vacant lot, or somebody has assembled a large site for development, so think of White Oak or White Flint or something like that. At that point, it makes sense to zone for townhomes because those will be cheaper than new single family housing. I think the issue is what happens if you try to replace existing single family housing with new townhomes, and there you're not getting a bang for your buck. So, there is some logic in allowing more townhome development on undeveloped sites, but not coming in and raising your neighborhood. So I thought I would just mention that.
That's a good point.
Very good point. Yeah.
Liz Joyce, go ahead.
Yes, I have an answer to Carlotta's question. She mentions what can we propose for alternatives, and I put in the chat some of the suggestions in the post-neoliberal housing policies companion book, and these are just a few, and they have to do with changing tax policies and the kind of thing that the government could do. But another important paper that isn't here, and what Erika is absolutely nailed, the previous planning board chair, whose name is Royce Hanson, before the one Joel was talking about, wrote a wonderful long essay called Of Pigs and Parlors, and it's about the supposed YIMBY versus NIMBY debate. And he says that politicians settle on zoning as a quote unquote solution because they know they have two pretty intractable camps opposed to any solutions that, as you say, might work. subsidies are required for some affordable housing, and some of the plans that are in place or that are being suggested will decrease the supply of affordable housing, and that seems to be not terribly considered. Then there's also what I believe you economists call externalities. What are the other costs that are going to be associated with this? As someone has said, there's going to be the entire tax-paying population will have to pay, let's say, for the infrastructure that is needed for this new buildings. So there are alternatives, but if the mindset is a public relations one rather than a fact-based one, you have a problem. And the other side has been incredibly successful. In Greater Washington, it's financed by developers. So young people, God bless them, who are absorbing this kind of thinking, are listening to a very clever PR campaign by developers, because and they are also implying that to oppose some of the alternatives is to be supporting discriminatory policies. And as Cheryl says, our own Office of Legislative Oversight has repeatedly put out analyses showing that some of these policies would increase gentrification and displacement. And I've got a bibliography of several pages of studies that show that. So the mythology has been very successful. It's really important. The mythology has been very successful, has taken hold, and we have to figure out how to get another narrative out there.
Okay, thank you, Liz. This next question relates to something that I want to say. Despite the flaws in the legislation and the comptroller's report, I know that there are a lot of young people who are having trouble buying a house. I know my own kids, who range from 27 to 33, are nowhere near being able to buy a home. And we can't just dismiss it as, there's no problem at all, because there are people struggling. The only thing I've ever found is a Harvard Joint Center on Housing that said that young people are getting married and partnering about 4 or 5 years later than previous generations. And it has sort of always been true to buy a house, you need 2 incomes. Maybe not in the 50s, but they are. I think that life is very expensive. I know my own kids are struggling with it. So we have to be careful about how we talk about young people, and that we're not really dismissive as if there's no problem, which leads me to someone's question here with the initials DNH. I'm sorry, I don't know who that is, but it says, can the experts on the call describe the basic problems in Maryland's housing market as a separate issue from the shortcomings of the starter senior bill? My basic question is, what can we do that makes economic sense and can work? And I know Liz said the Vanderbilt article has some suggestions, but Erika, what is the problem with the housing market in Maryland, or is there one?
Well, I think one of the issues is recent history. The pandemic pushed up housing prices because suddenly people wanted bigger places to live. They're willing to spend more of their income on housing. And then interest rates have, as I said, gone up so fast. And so mortgage rates, although they're not high historically, people got used to the idea that mortgage rates should be 2-3%. And now when they got up to 7, it makes housing way more expensive. So I think that's the issue. I don't know that I think that people have needed 2 incomes to buy a house for decades. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I couldn't afford to live in Montgomery County until I was 40, so I'm not terribly sympathetic about. Yeah, housing around here is expensive, but it's I don't know what else to say about it. The housing market is very disrupted. It's very disrupted. I think that a few years from now, it will look really different. And maybe especially for our kids who've gone through so much turmoil, so much upheaval, it's hard to, really think about a stable future maybe. But the housing market is sorting itself out. And I think it will over the next couple of years, for better or for worse. I mean, those of us who own houses are not going to be happy if the housing market collapses. That's not going to be good. So, but a steady stability, heading towards stability in the housing market, I would say is very likely over the next few years.
Leanne, go ahead.
What I wanted to say was the problem that I think is the fundamental problem is the United States, since roughly Jimmy Carter era, started to phase out the government financing of housing. And a lot of the government support for housing in recent years has not been supply driven, it's been housing vouchers, which say to people, okay, you can go out and use this voucher to pay a portion of your rent. So there is a problem with supply, but the problem is that we've turned it over to the private sector, and the idea was that the private sector would do a more efficient and a better idea of producing affordable housing for everyone. And the private sector doesn't want to do it. And this is not a criticism, because they are relying on investment capital for which they have to pay a 20% roughly interest rate. And Alan Davis on the call is a bigger expert on the investment returns than I am, but it's somewhere in the vicinity of 20%. So if you have to pay out 20% just to get your initial capital in to do your project, and on top of that, you have to find a lender and borrow more money, you don't have much of an incentive to do affordable housing. If you have a choice, you are going to do the charge the rent or the price that is the highest that you can possibly charge within market dictates. And that's just a rational response. So if it's desired to have the private sector develop housing that's more affordable, the private sector has to be assisted by the public sector in bringing the costs down. So one of the things that's been done in Montgomery County is donating surplus public land for the construction of affordable housing. And that's similar to what Governor Moore has proposed in one of his housing bills. That's a good idea. Similarly, there is a smaller program in Montgomery County. It would be wonderful if it could be expanded, but it's called the Housing Production Fund. And what it does is it goes to a developer and it gives the developer capital that has an interest rate of about 7.5% on that upfront equity instead of the 20. And the developer uses that to produce mixed income housing and set aside some of the units. I suppose it could also be done with homes. So some of the homes, you could do that too, for people at lower income levels. And again, that's a subsidy approach, but it's working with the private sector to deliver the housing. And that's another good idea. So it might not be viable. I don't think it's viable for the state in 2026, but it's something to think of. And, so creative financing approaches are really important.
Okay. Chris Reynolds, you haven't spoken and you have a couple of comments here. Do you want to speak them out loud?
Oh, I think they're best kept to myself. Thank you very much.
You think what?
My thoughts are best kept to myself at this point. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Jerry Garson, go ahead.
One of the problems that everyone keeps speaking is about building, I'll call it affordable housing or low income housing. One of the problems is low income housing actually costs more per square foot than high income housing, because any low income housing has to be built vandal proof. That means instead of using sheetrock between the walls, you need cinder blocks so that people don't punch holes in the walls. The elevators and everything have to be vandal proof. The halls have to be vandal proof. So it's actually cheaper building luxury housing per square foot than it is building low income housing per square foot. And no one wants to really discuss that. And when New York City found out about it, that it was more expensive building low income housing, they basically stopped, and the rest of the federal government stopped building low income housing because they discovered the costs were much higher than high income housing.
Okay. All right. We're going to say thank you to Erika and move on to our regular meeting business, which you're welcome to stay if you want to see
Thanks,
what we.
everyone. No, I'll depart, but thanks
All
so
right,
much for
okay.
listening.
Thank you
I'm
very
available
much.
for questions, and I'll send the final version of this to you, Cheryl, so you can distribute it.
Yeah, thank you very
Okay.
much.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Send us your email, Erika.
Oh, I will. I'll share it. Okay. Bye-bye.
All right. Good night. Okay, we're now going to turn to the routine business that we skipped. First is approval of the agenda, which appeared on page 2 of the newsletter online. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
I object to approving it.
Okay.
I'd like to put item 6, the February program, as item 1, and then everything else follows after that, because we did it that way.
Right. Okay, so as amended, is there a motion to approve the agenda?
Motion to approve.
Seconded?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed say no. Any discussion? The agenda is approved. Next is approval of the minutes of the January meeting, which were published online at page 6. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor of approving the minutes say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. The minutes are approved. Next is the treasurer's report. Jerry Garson, go ahead.
We operate on a fiscal year starting January 1st, and January 1st through today, February 8th, we've taken in $1,761 in membership dues. We've had expenses of $1,384, giving us a net income for the period of $377. And our current bank balance is $6,065. If you have any questions, contact me.
Okay, now we will move to announcements. I want to mention that I think we have a new member, the Cabin John Civic Association. Is Pete here still? Maybe not. Anyway, welcome to Cabin John and Pete. Announcements. I'm going to try to put together an online town hall for the delegates of the Civic Federation and the state delegates, whichever ones want to show up. I haven't invited the state delegates yet. Tentatively set for February 22nd at 4 p.m. It will be virtual. If anyone wants to help with that, email me offline, please. I'm also working on some lobby visits on this bill. Beginning with Delegate Laura Charkoudian. I've asked for February 17th as a date for that meeting. If anyone on this call from District 20 would like to attend, please reach out to me. House hearing, as Michelle mentioned, is on Thursday this week, and the Senate hearing is the following Tuesday. Sign-ups for hearings always start 48 hours before the hearing. Are there any other announcements?
Yeah, let me make an announcement on behalf of the Parents Coalition, the Taxpayers League. Paula has told us that they're having their FY 2027 budget palooza on Zoom on Monday, February 16th, 7:30 to 8:30. It's virtual, and you can find some information on the Civic Federation's Facebook page.
Okay, Leanne, do you have your hand up?
Yes, I do.
Go ahead.
Basically, this is apropos the lobbying that you mentioned, Cheryl. CCCFH has a letter, a quote-unquote sign-on letter, an electronic sign-on letter that would go to the members of the state committees, House and Senate, hearing the Strider and Silver Homes Act. And I will make sure, Cheryl, that you have it so that if you want to send it out for people to sign, that's one way to express disapproval of this legislation.
Okay. Okay. Someone want to say something?
Jerry Dawson, I have an announcement. We've had a major sewer problem in Montgomery County. there was a 72-inch sewer main that's located basically just near the American Legion Bridge, the Clara Barton Parkway, and the Potomac River. It's been an ongoing thing, and they've already dumped over 300,000 gallons of 300 million gallons of sewage into the C&O Canal and into the Potomac River. And I would tell everyone, stay away from the C&O Canal, anything south of the American Legion Bridge, basically probably for the next 6 months or a year, because it's just all full of all kinds of human waste that have not been treated.
Ugh. Okay. Any other announcements? Okay, I don't know if anyone got to see the council's consideration today of state bills. They went through everything that was unrelated to this package. They did get as far as discussing the two governors' bills, but not the starter and Silver Homes one. And the transit-oriented development, they decided to support the I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank. The other bill is, the vesting rights. So developers, they can, whenever their project is approved, then they keep the right to build with those rules that were in place for 5 years. So they have some predictability about moving forward. Planning has some amendments, sort of clarifying, what is a final application and at what point does it really vest, and really big projects have multiple approvals. Didn't sound like their amendments are in any way troubling, and the council, I think, is holding it over, but saying they would, go along with that bill as well if those amendments were made. And then on the starter and Silver Homes, they ran out of time. They pushed it to last. Will Juando reiterated his call to have a sort of a public briefing where the state housing people would come and the planning people and the council members could ask questions and talk about the bill, and the public would be able to see this consideration. Natalie rejected it. She said she's had many, many conversations behind the scenes with Jake Day and the governor's legislative person in charge of spearheading this. And then Andrew Friedson said he'd also had many, many conversations. And then Kate Stewart said she's had a lot of conversations. And then they made a joke out of, there was a lot of people calling the governor's office about this, but we don't really know. We don't know what they're saying or what their position is behind the scenes. And Natalie rejected Will's suggestion, which I thought was important, to bring the whole discussion out in public. And she rejected that and said there are residents that want to hear about the bill, they can watch the state briefings, but she would not be scheduling that. A lot of election politics have come into the council. They even prior to that, there was a bill about face masks, ICE not being allowed to wear face masks, and Will has a bill, and they all discussed they were going to support the state bill on that subject, but not the local bill. So it's just, there's a lot of pettiness going on, frankly, at the moment, and I think part of why the public briefing idea was slapped down was because they're being petty to Will. So that happened today. I'm not really thrilled with the idea that the whole discussion's going on behind the scenes and we can't see it. So the other thing I wanted to ask people is about the grassroots. We sent an alert. I've heard from Carlotta about what happened in her neighborhood, but what kind of reaction you're getting, and if people are writing letters. I have the impression that, I think Marissa in Joando's office told me after we did ours, asking people to go to the council, she said she had a handful of letters from people. And so have you tried to get letters to your state delegates, and what kind of feedback you're getting? I'm just trying to judge what we need to do next. The only way this bill is going to be made acceptable to us is through a rather massive grassroots effort directed at the people who are voting on it, which is our delegates and senators. So why don't you just tell me what you think?
Leanne, do you want to tell them how many jot form letters have already been?
Yeah, so far I've heard that at least 450 have been sent to the state and the state committees hearing the legislation. And we will make that a printout of that available to the council and available to our delegates in Annapolis.
That is great, Leanne. Anybody else getting feedback from your neighbors on this?
Our board has discussed it. We'll discuss it on Thursday, but everybody is behind it, and we were willing to chip in even for the lobbyists. But before we could do that, they got the assets that they needed.
Yeah. I know that Joe Harkin's got a list of condo association managers that, a lot of them are not members of the Civic Fed. I think we're going to send some kind of a modified version of our Ledge Alert to them so that they know what's going on. We also have a small group that's been meeting across counties with some groups like ours in Prince George's County, and that one includes a council member, which is how I've learned that their council took a very strong position against this bill and immediately assigned this council member to go see Jake Day and the Speaker of the House, who's from Prince George's County. It's why our council is always, just seems to never fail to disappoint, really. But they're really working their grassroots in Prince George's County and some of the other counties as well in this small group where we're sort of discussing. It includes Howard County, Baltimore County. Karen Bolte, go ahead.
I was just going to say thank you to Leanne. We forwarded the CCCFH letter to our community on our community listserv, and I asked people to tell me if they sent the letter in. So, but Leanne, I mean that would be included in your final count. But only 4 people told me that they actually sent the letter. That doesn't mean that other people didn't do it. They just didn't tell me about it. But we had a pretty robust discussion on the listserv. I mean, in our community, this was the same thing for the Attainable Housing Strategies Initiative. It's really overwhelming opposition to it. There was one member of our community who said, "Oh, but people want to be able to, move into our wonderful community and have, a house that they can afford." But, I made it very clear that, the issue is that our single family neighborhood was not designed for townhouse densities. And what about, our 70-plus-year-old pipes and our overcrowded schools and the roads and all of those issues. So our community is aware of it. And as it moves forward in the process, I could probably go back and maybe get some more support among our community members. But I also listened to the county council non-consideration of the Starter and Silver Homes Act earlier today. And I was really concerned about Fanny Gonzalez saying that, yes, she's spoken to Moore's office and Jake Day and the planning board. Because from my perspective, and this is the point that I made, I wrote a letter to our District 16 delegation, who unfortunately are not on the committees considering the bill. But I made the point that this has already been considered Montgomery County and rejected. And it's been rejected as part of the Attainable Housing Strategies, as part of the ZTA 2502 going into the interior of the neighborhoods, and then again with University Boulevard Corridor Plan. So from my perspective, our county council should be completely against it, saying that we already raised this issue in Montgomery County. It was overwhelmingly rejected. We scaled back to pass, ZTA 2502. And because it's going to override local zoning authority, this should be like a non-starter. And clearly they are not willing to do that. And I'm not even sure that they're going to take a stand on it as a council. And that was very disappointing to me.
I mean, we have a sort of a big cultural problem with this council. They appointed a council member behind closed doors without any public consideration, and they're routinely violating the State Open Meetings Act. I filed 2 separate complaints over Open Meetings Act violations as an individual, not on behalf of the Civic Fed, and got a response to the first one today that did agree with me on 4 or 5 different violations of the Open Meetings Act. I haven't gotten the second response yet. Kim Prasad of Epic of Montgomery has twice now successfully raised Open Meetings Act complaints. They just don't care. I think carrying on all of their discussions behind the scenes and leaving the public out of even watching it, is a big problem that, we need to address. It's something that we're going to have to address with the council, the transparency and the lack of openness. It just kind of puts across to me an attitude of we were elected, we'll handle it, mind your own business. And it's just very, very offensive, I think. Liz Joyce, go ahead.
Yes, I agree with you. And with Karen, I think that it's very unlikely that our council would take a stand against it. I think they have been working behind the scenes with the governor and the Secretary of Housing to undermine even what they have done. This morning, I heard Evan Glass speak at the District 18 breakfast. I asked him about these bills, and he didn't seem to know about them or wanted not to know about them. And he also raved about the controller's report. You'd think it'd come down from Mount Sinai. He was so complimentary. So this is what we're dealing with. It's really kind of scary. And we have to be polite and positive and as fact-based as we can, but we're dealing with a mindset and that is not evidence-based and that is an agenda that's going like a freight train.
I see someone else has a hand raised, but for some reason I can't see it. They're not moving to the front of the queue. Alan, can you see who it is? Oh, Paul Jarozinski. Go ahead, Paul.
And the one question I had is Mark Eldridge was opposed to this at the county level. Has anybody talked to him? Somebody was going to talk to him or one of his aides to find out if he was going to take a position on this bill?
So, I mean, I just know what was reported actually to me by people in Prince George's County who met with Mako, that he tried at first to get a vote opposed to the bill and then was persuaded that the best strategy for moving forward with the governor was support with amendments, with very significant amendments being the plan. And that only passed by a half of a vote or something. So I'm sure he does have a position. Debbie Spielberg sent me the Mako's amendments, the other day. But here's a question I wanted to pose to the group, something that's been troubling me for a while. There's a lot of exemptions in this bill. And so you have historic districts. So Tacoma Park, for example, is one. It's a huge swath of Tacoma Park right around the Red Line station. Nothing will be built there. And there are other historic districts as well. I think Gaithersburg has one, Rockville has one maybe. And then you have the small municipalities are seeking to be exempted. Mako represents the county, so they put forward something to say the smaller counties in the state would be exempted. So it's kind of like central Maryland is now in. And then the smaller municipalities are seeking to be exempted somehow. And so that takes them out of it. And a lot, when you look at the exemptions, and then of course the ag reserve, which I guess makes sense, but it tends to be wealthier areas and pushes the entire target for Montgomery County into a smaller subset. And my question is whether this is becoming an equity issue, the carve-outs, and whether we want to say if we're going to have one size fits all zoning, then everybody should be in. Or do we want to say that those exemptions make sense and the rest of us can absorb whatever they decide to do? Anybody go? I'll just think about it.
I'll say that last thing makes no sense. I mean, this whole thing where we're lining up exemptions, why shouldn't everybody be exempt? That's pass the bill and make everybody exempt. That's then the governor will be happy. But no, that doesn't make any sense when you start lopping off. Either it's good for all or it's not. And I think generally most of us would agree it's not good for all. And I go back in my testimony, I referred to the fact that the governor in his public statement said he wanted to take 300 acres of state-owned land and convert that land to affordable housing. In my write-up, I suggest that's a good thing to do. That seems to make sense. They can build affordable housing. They can give them incentives. They can discount the taxes they're charging on them to build affordable housing on state land, near transit. All that makes sense rather than trying to do one size fits all for the whole state.
Yeah.
But yeah, just to back you up, I don't think exemptions is the way to go and say Montgomery County will accept it all and everybody else can be exempt. That makes no sense.
Okay. Sorry, I just took a little stretch here. It looks like Jerry and two others have hands up. For some reason, it's not lining up on my screen. So I guess Jerry, you can go first. I'll try to
Well,
figure
the
out.
whole idea of exemptions, like exempting the ag reserve, which is 1/3 of the county, that's the only place you can build affordable or more affordable housing. We also exempt all the fancier parts of Potomac that don't have water and sewer. So all the exemptions are basically saying any place that there's cheap land, and land is actually cheaper in the fancy parts of Potomac than it is in the rest of the county because there they have basically 2-acre zoning and they do have no water and sewer. So we're exempting almost everyone other than what's already built. And to say that we don't need infrastructure is just a joke. As I mentioned earlier about the whole sewer pipe collapsing. We're having a meeting tomorrow night in my neighborhood because they have to rebuild 95% of the sewers because they're over 70 years old and they're all deteriorating. And when you ask how about building in the ag reserve, we need to put infrastructure in. They have this idea that if you don't require infrastructure, the current residents have to pay it. The same way when they build all these burnable buildings, everyone's housing insurance is going to go up, their car insurance because of more fires. We saw what happened in California where they lost 16,000 homes. Maybe the governor would rather us lose 16,000 homes in Montgomery County or any place else. The fire code is the most important thing I could ever dream of. I mean, now they're telling me you can build 9 townhouses, all fully flammable, right next to my house. Well, are the builders going to put in a metal roof onto my house to protect it? No. We're going to have to absorb all the costs. So what this is actually doing, this bill, if they actually pass it, is making more unaffordable housing, not making any more affordable housing. And I think that's the goal of the developers, to get these 5,000 lot size so they can build a lot more McMansions and anything else. And that's why the council and everyone else thinks this is a great idea, because the whole idea is to displace as many poor people as possible with this bill.
Yeah. One question that I have to get an answer to, and I forgot to ask Michelle, is, she said that, lots that don't have water and sewer aren't eligible, but the bill actually says areas. And so it looks to me like something that could exempt, Potomac, because there are areas without water and sewer, but in doing so exempt homes that are on water, public water and sewer. Whether this is just going to exempt Potomac or whether it's really meant to just exempt houses without the appropriate water and sewer infrastructure. Joyce Quads, go ahead.
Yeah, I would just, did I unmute? Yeah, I did. My thought is when you were talking about the exemptions, I mean, the number of exemptions that are going through just makes the point. One size fits all does not fit. And when you go through picking them all out, you're just making the point that it needs to be under local control everywhere. And you're picking the small communities and so on that have their government, and many neighborhoods in the county, particularly older ones like where you and I live, don't. We have community associations and so on. So you're saying, well, that doesn't count. Well, that goes to your equity question. And I think it kind of makes their own point that it shows the fallacy of it to have so many exemptions.
Yeah. So I am having trouble seeing whose hands are up. Oh, Joe Harkins, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with Joyce. I would look at the exemptions as kind of proposing a poison pill. You just put it out there and make it extreme, maybe, but it does highlight all the ways in which this bill doesn't make any sense, just to pose everything in terms of exemptions. And the equity argument is a good one. I mean, all the historic districts tend to be in pretty wealthy municipalities.
And my neighborhood used to be on the historic atlas, and when they were doing the Silver Spring plan, they didn't want us to claim it, so they took it away from us. But they don't go in and take it away from wealthier neighborhoods.
Right.
Leanne, it's your turn.
Okay. I just wanted to mention that I spoke to a lobbyist for one of the municipalities, and what the individual municipalities are doing is to try to keep as much of their zoning powers as they possibly can and not have them affected by this bill, so that they can go back and potentially amend their own regulations to make themselves as unattractive as possible for upzoning. And so that is going on behind the scenes. And the reason that that's happening is the governor is really very, very adamant for a win and wants to pass this bill. The governor is not crazy about exemptions, but I suspect that he will, put in things that seem innocuous and knock various people out in order to get the thing passed. So that leaves those of us who are in unincorporated areas, just no zoning powers of our own, and just part of Montgomery County at risk unless we can get some sort of amendment passed that says, well, we in Montgomery County don't have to comply with this because we already have ZTA 2502. That kind of, and get it written so that any county that adopted something like ZTA 2502 wouldn't have to apply. That's one possibility, but I will agree with Joyce and others that just illustrates the problem with this bill. Everybody's trying to get out of it, and whoever's left being unable to get out of it is going to get hurt, so to speak. And so, I think it's on the one hand, everyone wants to ideally not be too hard on this bill, and try to compromise in some way. But when you get down to it, this is a terrible bill. and it ought to be killed. So, my personal position is anything that can be done to get rid of this bill is a good thing. And if that doesn't happen, it's going to be everybody trying to get out of it.
Yeah. Sorry. Anything else anyone wants to add at this point before we end the night? Okay. Well, keep me apprised what.
John just made a comment in the chat.
Who did?
John Holden, very important.
Okay, John, can you read it out loud, please?
Sure. I just said that when I asked Lori Charkoudian yesterday about her perspective on this bill, her response focused largely on guaranteeing affordability of the townhomes to be built. Lori's a key person because she's vice chair of the committee that's responsible for the bill. And I had mentioned asked for her perspective and mentioned a number of things that were concerns, including lack of affordability standards and environmental protections or infrastructure requirements and the like. And that was what she focused on. I think that she cares a lot about the environment and she cares a lot about affordability. So, but at the same time, she also, as she also said that depending on the responses from the governor's office, she has made inquiries, and how the bill is modified, that she remains open to supporting it. I took that as just her keeping an open mind, and because it's prior to the even having hearings, which come up later in the week.
Yeah.
And I started by mentioning the bit about preemption of local control over zoning. As I mentioned it because it was a little bit of a segue. We had the discussion, this was at a town hall type thing, and there'd been some prior discussion about preemption of federal and state laws. And she just said that she acknowledged that local control is important, especially for things like local resident input. But she noted that sometimes state preemption is necessary, and she gave some example of some prior situation related to some water issues in the Eastern Shore and the like. So anyhow, the part that's most important is what I put in the chat related to, potentially most important is the part about the focus on affordability. I'd like to think that that's where the governor is coming from, because affordability being the buzzword these days.
Yeah, I don't think that's where the governor's coming from, but Tacoma Park is a small municipality. They also have their own planning and a gigantic historic section. So that's Lorig's base and where she lives. So she's a little bit removed from the impact of this. And as is Artie Harris, who lives in the historic district of Tacoma Park. And so that's the importance of the rest of District 20, jumping in and being heard. Absent some compelling reason, the idea of single family homes that are sited with, 10-foot, whatever, side setbacks, suddenly getting townhouses built from the front to the back and side to side, covering the entire lot with no stormwater management or affordability requirements or environmental protections. It's too much. I think it's too radical, and can be quite damaging to people's property. It is.
I don't agree, Cheryl. I think it'll be important to make some of those points to Lorig when you or meet with her.
Yeah.
You say you're hoping to meet with her on the 17th?
I'm hoping. That's what I asked for today. I couldn't do it tomorrow. I couldn't do it tomorrow. I haven't finished my own testimony. But by the 17th, I'll be giving the same testimony. And I actually said days between, or preferably the 17th, so we're not making 2 trips to Annapolis. So we'll see what they say. Liz, what's up?
Yes, I just wanted to say, it's really interesting from my perspective, and I wouldn't necessarily say this publicly, but the state absolutely does have control over local zoning. As a matter of fact, any power that any council has is given to them by the state. But Prince George's and Montgomery are operating under the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission, which has a 100-year-old charter that needs to be revised. And as Alan will remember, we once wrote the governor about some of the ethics problems that really have been unresolved and uninvestigated. And the Attorney General told us that he has no authority over the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission. So in other words, there is huge amount of work that needs to be done because they police themselves. They have an internal ethics officer. And at the time of the issues with the previous planning board chair, previous planning board chair who resigned, who was forced to resign, was not only the chair of Montgomery County, but the chair of the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission. So this is the kind of thing that the catch-22 situation that the state would need to resolve, and they have deferred rather generously to the council on those issues, and it's been very frustrating to watch because the ethics violations were very serious.
Okay, it's 9 o'clock. I will entertain a motion to adjourn now.
So moved.
And a second.
Second.
Okay.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, say no. The motion is adopted. We are adjourned. Thank you all very much. It was a really interesting meeting, I think, and learned a lot from all of you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thanks.
Good night.
Sure.